Hello, welcome to the podcast of the COMET student meeting. I'm Dan.
And I'm Alice. COMET, which stands for the Centre of Observation and Modelling of Earthquakes, Volcanoes and Tectonics, is a research group across 10 universities, bringing together lots of people who are studying earthquakes and volcanoes in a range of different ways. Each year, the research students from across these different universities meet up to discuss their research progress. In this series of podcasts, we'll be chatting to 4 of these students about their research and life in and outside of their PhD, and try and convince you that earthquakes and volcanoes are cool.
In this episode, we'll be talking to Alice, a PhD student from the University of Oxford. Alice's research focuses on using geochemical analysis to look for signals of ancient volcanoes and their impact on the climate.
Hi Dan, what are we doing here today?
Hi Alice, today we've got Alice with us that isn't you, it's another one.
Cool. So Alice, you're a PhD student at Oxford. Do you want to give us a little spiel about what your PhD is about? What are you trying to find out?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a second year PhD student, and my project titled Sniffing Out Volcanic Fingerprints in Quaternary Sediment Records, which in plain English basically means we're going to try and identify whether volcanic eruptions leave mercury signals in lake sediments, or whether they emit enough mercury to be deposited into the environment and to be preserved over sort of thousands of years. And then that's kind of part of my broader research interests, which are how volcanoes interact with the climate and environment sort of over the past 100,000 years or so. So that's kind of like my mission statement of what I'm doing. And then my PhD is a big component of that. So the link between volcanism and emission of trace metals and trace elements, and how they are incorporated into the environment, and what factors may affect how they are incorporated into and cycled through the environment.
So you mentioned there that you're trying to work out what volcanoes are doing now, and they're also what they did in the past. So why do we care about what volcanoes have done in the past?
So basically, I think there's the really common human misconception that volcanic eruptions are really rare. They happen every so often. They're not really, unless you're in the country the volcano's in, it's not a massive problem. However, if we consider the return intervals of volcanic eruptions, in geological time, they're actually incredibly frequent. And even if we say haven't experienced a magnitude sort of 6 and up event, so for example, we had Mount Pinatubo erupt in 1991. That was a magnitude of 6. But any eruption above that magnitude, we've only really witnessed a couple, and none of those are in the modern era where we've got satellites to measure them and all that sort of thing. So we need to almost like look into the past to understand what these volcanoes did, and in turn, when they erupt again, because they will erupt and there will be a big eruption again in the future, how then we can understand what that eruption could do and what it's capable of, and then sort of arrange hazard management around that as well. And also because we see these really big sort of shifts in the environment and the climate of the Earth in the past, and we still don't entirely know what caused them. And so there's a real gap where we can start to look at, could it be volcanoes that are causing these big shifts? Or if it's not the volcanoes causing them, how could the volcanoes have played a role in these changes? So it's really the sort of interactions between the volcanoes and the climate and the environment, and then we can use that to inform our decision making for when volcanoes erupt in the future.
So you mentioned that you are trying to investigate all these volcanoes from the past and see how they're going to affect in the future. Well, how exactly did you go about doing this? As a person that studies earthquakes and don't know a lot about volcanoes, I'm assuming your methods are going to be very different to mine. So what exactly do you do to find out about these volcanoes?
It feels almost like a sort of forensic endeavor, because there's so many different avenues you can go down, and so many different sort of bits of evidence you can use. So the way I work is I often turn to existing databases. So we've got large magnitude explosive eruption databases that are incomplete, so that they're not completely reliable, but they've got a good number of eruptions, so we can start to look at the sort of how often big eruptions have occurred. We can then use records like stalagmites and ice cores that can preserve really sort of fine geochemical signals of these eruptions, and like markers almost for events. So even if we don't know the source of the eruption, for example, in an ice core, you may have a sulfur spike that you don't know the eruption that caused it, but you know that indicates there was an eruption at that point in time. And then you can start to link it with the environmental changes you may see. And then we can also then combine the two and start to combine the databases and the naturally occurring records like the ice cores, stalagmites, lake sediments, and then start to almost like piece together an idea of what points in time things occurred, and start to really reduce the uncertainties associated with these links, and then come up with ideas of how they could mechanistically or be linked together, really. So it's not quite as niche as, say, certain disciplines of earth sciences where you've got a certain technique, you've got a certain avenue that you go down. This is what I do, is very much sort of looking at everything, like, and trying to, which can feel quite scary at times. And I mean, some of the work we're doing on the Mercury at the minute has taken us into glaciology and oceanography, and all these disciplines that you wouldn't on paper think, well, they've got nothing to do with volcanoes, so why would you do that? But it's taken us down these routes to understand what's going on and why we do see and don't see certain things.
So have you found anything interesting from this work that you've been doing on Mercury so far?
Yes, so we've, as a volcanologist, they may be slightly disappointed with the fact that we haven't found any sort of significant mercury signals associated with the eruptions. But then what we have discovered is this might be because of a resolution thing. So maybe because the lakes only, for example, put it in simple terms, if you have different lake samples and each, say, centimeter equates to 20 years, for example, if you have that, then if you've got a signal that is only present in the environment for less than 10 years, it's probably going to be eroded by the natural process in the lake occurring over that 20-year interval. So even though the resolution is fantastic, it may not be enough to distinctly capture those volcanic signals. And so maybe one thing we're thinking is maybe volcanic eruptions can't be detected using mercury on sort of 1,000-year timescales, or maybe it requires a certain type of volcanism. So the big, large igneous province volcanism, that lasts for millions of years. That no need to worry as well. Those are long in the past; they're not going to happen again. But so is it a certain kind of volcanism that yield mercury signals, and then is it not as simple as saying, oh well, a small eruption would leave a slightly smaller signal? Maybe it wouldn't leave one at all. I've also found that glaciers can have a really profound effect on mercury concentrations in lakes, and in particular the melting of glaciers. And if you've got climate conditions where you've got the melting of glaciers combined with dry conditions where permafrost can exist, that might facilitate the greater flushing of mercury into the lake. And that's kind of huge implications for the Arctic and nowadays, because there's permafrost there that limits the amount of infiltration of water into the ground. And so you've got more mercury running over land and into lakes and into watercourses, which is, with melting glaciers in the current world, is quite a big problem. So what started as a volcanic project is becoming more of a glaciological project in that sense. But it's all a good thing, and it's exciting to be able to sort of move into those different avenues and start to answer slightly different questions than we anticipated.
Have you found it challenging to kind of jump across these different disciplines? Is there any moment where you're like, oh, I wish I had paid attention in my first year whatever course? I would understand much better.
I think the most kind of overwhelming thing about it is when you dive into anything new, you realize how little you don't know. I think because you kind of, with science, you have an idea and you think, oh, maybe it could relate to this process. You start to read into that process and go down that rabbit hole, and you think, oh, there's actually a lot more to this process than I initially anticipated. And that's one of maybe the overwhelming things. But I think if you're staying fairly sort of focused on your research question, and you're kind of very grounded and central in that sense, you don't feel like you're straying too far away, because in the end of the day, you're still trying to answer the same basic questions. You're just looking in opening different doors rather than sort of staying quite niche. And in a way, it's kind of, I think in science, it's kind of needed. So like that interest in disciplines outside of your own, I think, is a really beneficial and really powerful thing, and something that is it's really, really needed. And really, I think a lot of people get scared to venture out of their area of expertise, because I think you hear stay in your lane, the phrase stay in your lane, an awful lot. And I think, well, I think up to a point maybe, but there has to be a time where, you can follow your interest in certain other fields and certain other disciplines, because even though you may not know everything, you can call people who do, you can and learn something new along the way, and it keeps your interest there as well. Like, it keeps it fun and exciting.
So you like to not stay in your lane. So your PhD is your lane, but you're leaving your lane and going outside of your lane. So what outside of this PhD do you do in your free time?
Okay, so I'm a freelance artist. I do sort of commissions of animals. It's like it's a good intra-seminar activity to do, I find, because it's like when you can listen to talks and you absorb information, you can draw at the same time. So I do that. I'm a CrossFit athlete as well, so I train 5-6 times a week, and sort of a mix of strength training and gymnastics and conditioning, sort of fitness cardiovascular style workouts. So yeah, I do that 5 or 6 times a week, and then I love going hiking. I guess every earth scientist, it's kind of, they enjoy being outside and being in nature. So that's my sort of stereotypical answer. And then when I can, I'm from Yorkshire originally, so every sort of once a month I'll go up home and spend some time with my mum and my sister and dog as well. So
do you get to, in CrossFit, do you compete in this? I know nothing about volcanoes or CrossFit.
Not yet. I mean, I've always been trained. I mean, I was a qualified, or I still am a qualified personal trainer, and that's what the job I had during my undergrad. I was personal training people, and I mean, I don't do that anymore. But so I've been involved in fitness for sort of quite a few years. But I originally did almost like a bodybuilding style of training. It's only recently that I've transitioned into CrossFit and becoming more of an athlete rather than just a sort of recreational trainer. So, but the aim is to compete hopefully later this year, or if not next year. Hopefully, fingers crossed, if all goes to plan, which I mean, I guess we can't even say now because the past 2 years, like, what are plans? So we'll see what happens. But that's the aim, the long-term aim.
So it seems like you have a lot of stuff that you have to try and squeeze into every day. And so do you want to tell us a bit about what is your day-to-day as a PhD student like?
Sure. So I'm an early riser. I'm one of those annoying people who seems to be able to get up early and be fun. But then it also means that I go to bed really early as well. So I usually get up in the morning. I also, like, as a little part-time job alongside the PhD, I do some social media sort of coordination for a fitness/business mentoring company. So I get up in the morning, and first thing I do is an hour of work for them. And then I'll spend an hour actually doing some creative writing. So if I'm working on a manuscript, it's usually that time in the morning you're not overthinking things too much. You kind of just write and let it flow. So I almost just have a complete word dump of any ideas that I've had onto the page for an hour. And then I'll stop that and go out for a walk. To almost consolidate those ideas in my head and kind of get to grips with what I've just done. Then I'll come back in and I'll spend, say, the rest of the day from about 10 until about 2 o'clock working on the research stuff. So whether that's sort of refining manuscript of the creative stuff we've done that morning, or it might be meetings, or it might be sort of answering reviews, all those sorts of things, like the researchy tasks. Then at 2 I go and train, and I usually am at training until about 6. I mean, arguably it could be quicker if because of public transport. I get the bus into the gym, and buses are not too reliable, but hey, that's a side note. So I get back about 6, and then I'll do a bit more research work, and then I'll finish off the day with an hour of more of the social media work, and then I'll have sort of half an hour to chill out and then go to bed. So it's almost like a well-oiled machine when I'm in sort of work mode. So it kind of just flows from one thing to the next. But it does mean that the weekends are very the foot is taken off the gas a little bit at the weekends. I still work most weekends, but it just is not quite as sort of bouncing from one thing to the next, or quite as intense.
Wow. I wish my days were as structured as that. Unfortunately, I'm much more of a person who's like, oh, I'm gonna get out of bed. What should I do today? Oh, do.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah, and I think that it's great to hear, because different people have like different styles, and what works for you will work for like some subset of people, and then other people have like different styles of doing things.
No, agreed. I think I've not met many people who work in the same way that I do, but then I think, like you say, everyone has their own learning / working style, and I guess one of the main important things is just identifying how you work best, and then just really drilling down on that. It's just really drilling down, I think, on what the times you enjoy and the times that you feel you can work to your best, really, and also cutting yourself some slack, which is something I really need to start doing. That's my New Year's resolution, if I've got any, to not be too regimented all the time.
Be nice to yourself.
Exactly.
And that's your advice to you for the new year. But do you have any advice for an undergrad who would be considering doing a PhD?
Yeah, so one thing I would say is just, well, I guess there are two things that I'd say. The first is follow what you enjoy. I think there's a lot of pressure to say maybe there are certain PhD fields or further education fields that people may be like, oh, that's actually preferable. You want to be working on that, you should be working on that. Whereas it's like, I think the main thing is just follow the project you enjoy. And often you get a gut feeling when you see a project advertised and you speak to the supervisor. You have a feeling, and it's hard to put a finger on until you've actually felt it. Like you just feel, I really resonate with this topic, or I really get along well with this supervisor. So follow what you enjoy, and then I guess don't be afraid. Don't get scared when things get hard. Don't get intimidated, and don't get nervous, and don't almost shy away from the discomfort and the hard bits, like, because at the end of the day, those are the moments that really make you as a researcher, and really make you and remind you why you love doing what you're doing. And if you truly love what you do, the hard days are always overcome and always surpassed by the really good days, and the good days often follow the bad days as well. So
to be fair, I think that's probably good advice for everyone, regardless if you're doing a PhD or not.
True.
Maybe you can add another side business as a business of inspirational quotes. I'd buy that.
Set up a social media page and the daily inspo. I think do you know what though? I think it's been interesting being so involved with the fitness industry alongside research, and there's a lot of things that we could take from athletes and sports people and apply as researchers, because I think someone once said to me, they're like, you're like an athlete, but as an academic you're an athlete but in a brain sense rather than a muscle sense. And I thought, that's incredible. And I think there's a lot we can learn from athletes in terms of how to periodize, to have periods where work's really intense, and then know how to sort of back off a little bit, and knowing how, and having those sorts of boundaries, and having those sorts of that discipline as well. I think that's a really cool thing, and there's an abundance in fitness of inspirational quotes as well. So
yeah, there you go. That's all you need. Brain athlete.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about the research going on